Do you have an independent mind? If so, I hope you'll subscribe to my YouTube channel. Just click on the subscribe button, ring that little bell, and stay up to date with my daily content. Thank you. New census information. Big story today, but I think that many media outlets are missing two takeaways with great significance. Let me begin by asking a question. Imagine you're moving. You have the gift of mobility, meaning you can choose what community you're going to reside in. What are you looking for? You're looking for low taxes. You're looking for good schools. Are you also considering the political dynamics? Is it important to you as a conservative to live among the like-minded? Is it important to you as a progressive to live in a blue community or blue state? Let me explain why I asked that question. The census is taken every 10 years. And from the census information, our political maps, meaning our congressional maps on a federal level, our state legislative maps on a state level, are then drawn. The first step of the process is reapportionment. We've just had that. Reapportionment is the process whereby a determination is made based strictly on population as to whether states are going to gain or lose or maintain their congressional delegation. And after reapportionment, then comes redistricting. Redistricting is when the states are then charged with the responsibility of redrawing the congressional boundary lines and the state legislative boundary lines. That takes longer. That won't come for several more months, and it'll be part of an ongoing and contested process. The way the Washington Post reported the significance of this new census data, I think is accurate and pretty straightforward. Michael Scher wrote the story. Let me just give you the lead. Political power in the United States will continue to shift south this decade as historically Democratic states that border the Great Lakes give up congressional seats and electoral votes to regions where Republicans currently enjoy a political advantage, according to new data from the U.S. Census Bureau. Texas, Florida, North Carolina, three states that voted twice for President Trump, are set to gain a combined 4 additional seats in Congress in 2023 because of population growth, granting them collectively as many new votes in the Electoral College for the next presidential election as Democratic-leaning Hawaii has in total. At the same time, 4 northern states with Democratic governors that President Biden won in 2020, Illinois, Michigan, Pennsylvania, New York, will each lose a single congressional seat. Ohio, a nearby Republican-leaning state, will also lose a seat in Congress. So let's put this in the presidential election context. What does it mean? If you use this new metric and apply it to the 2020 election just concluded between Trump and Biden, Joe Biden would have dropped three electoral votes from his margin. So inconsequential, right? But if you apply through this lens the new data to the 2000 outcome, meaning Bush v. Gore, it would have had a significant impact on the race. Aaron Blake points all of this out in the Washington Post by saying, if we reran the 2020 Electoral College with the new electoral votes by state, Biden's margin would shrink from 306 to 232 to 303 to 235. That seems negligible, but if you overlay the 2000 presidential results 3 reapportionments ago on the current electoral vote totals, George W. Bush's narrow win, 271 electoral votes, becomes a much more decisive 290 electoral votes. That gives you a sense of where things have trended. Okay, so that's in the presidential context. I think the greater significance is at the congressional level because control of the House of Representatives right now is a game of inches. What's the margin? I think it's a six or seven. I think it's a 6-seat advantage for the Democratic Party. The Cook Political Report's David Wasserman, really bright guy. I rely on his expertise often. He points out that with regard to redistricting, Republicans control the map making with regard to 187 congressional seats or districts. Democrats control 75. The rest are by commission, some shared arrangement of power. Hence, the headlines today that discuss how Republicans are the beneficiaries of the new census data that was released yesterday. And that might be true in the short term, but here comes number one of two of my takeaways that I'm not hearing said enough elsewhere about the census information. First, the growth that's coming in the South and the growth that's coming in the West, in those states that are picking up congressional representation to the detriment of the Rust Belt, that growth, and its growth in comparison to other states, that growth is coming largely from people of color, African Americans, Latinos, as well as the young. Well, they tend to be more Democratic in their outlook than Republican. My point being that in the short term, it might be a Republican state that picks up a new representative, a new member of Congress. But if those trends continue, then the growth is going to cause those red states in the South or red states in the West to eventually become blue states. This is all a conversation about gerrymandering, right? We're having a conversation about how the census data comes in, and in those areas where it's not handled on a nonpartisan basis, the parties, whomever's in control of the state legislature, the parties then use that information to draw battle lines that benefit their particular party, their particular candidates. I think gerrymandering is a serious problem and one of the drivers of polarization in America, but certainly not the only one, and arguably not even the most important one. I always put the media influence, the polarized media influence, at the top of the list of those things that are driving polarization in the country. Another of them is dark money. Another of them would be closed primaries. Another of them would be social media and the incivility and partisanship that's evident in social media, including on Facebook. Okay, so takeaway number one from the census data is that short-term Republicans may benefit, but we need to know which demographics within those states are causing them to have population growth before we can really determine the long-term impact, which I suspect will be to the Democratic Party favor. Now here's my second observation, and this brings me back to my opening question of if you were moving and had control of the locale where you'd live, the community, the state, would politics play a role? I ask that question because when it comes to geography and politics, gerrymandering gets the lion's share of our attention. But there's another phenomena at play: self-sorting. I read a book a couple of years ago by Robert Cushing and Bill Bishop called The Big Sort, which really brought this point home to me. And the lesson was we are choosing to live among the like-minded. In other words, there are forces at play here where it's not just a function of politicians drawing boundary lines that are then evidence of polarization, but rather fixed boundary lines around us are also evidencing this trend. Let me say it more simply. In the last two elections, contests that were extremely close, Hillary and Trump, Trump and Biden, in those last two presidential cycles, most people lived in communities where the final vote wasn't close at all. In 2016, 62% of voters lived in a county that either Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump won by 20 points or more. In the most recent election, Biden and Trump, 2020, that number decreased just a hair to 58.2%. So think about that. 6 in 10 of us in the last two presidential cycles were living in a county that was a lopsided victory result, either for Hillary or for Trump or for Biden. And this is a relatively recent phenomena. It's been since the 1970s that the number of lopsided or blowout or landslide counties has been on the rise. If you go back to 1976, which was Jerry Ford and Jimmy Carter, 26% of voters lived in a landslide county. So go back to 76. I'll say it this way. In the mid 70s, only a quarter of us lived in a landslide county. Fast forward to contemporary times, that number is now 60% of us. That's not politicians drawing boundary lines, because the boundary lines for counties, they're fixed. We have 3,113 counties in the United States. In 2016, I'll give you one more way to think of this data. I hope your eyes are not glazing over, because I think it's really important and being overlooked. In 2016, of the nation's 3,113 counties, only 303 of them were decided by single-digit margins, meaning less than 10%, or a different way of saying it, very few competitive counties. That's 2016, 303. If you go back to 1992 was Bush v. Clinton. There were 1,096 counties, or a third of counties, that were decided by single-digit margins. There has been a very pronounced growth of blowout counties in the last several decades of American presidential elections. Look at this map. This map is a map of presidential races in the United States from 1992 through 2016. I don't have 2020 at my fingertips. But what you're looking at here are blotches of red and blotches of blue, representative of counties where either the red or the blue, the Republican or Democratic candidate for president, won by 20 points or more over the years. So you go back to 92, which is Bush 41 versus Bill Clinton. There's not much color on that map. There's more color on the map in 96, and even more color on the map in 2000, and 04, and 08, 2012, and 2016. Look at the change 1992 to 2016. Again, what you're looking at in that 2016 map, with the colorization of mostly red and on the coasts and other pockets of blue, you are looking at counties where the presidential candidate won by 20 points or more over the year. In other words, where you see color, it means it's a landslide. Very little of the country in 1992, almost all of the country by 2016. That's not gerrymandering. That's not drawing boundary lines based on the census data that was just released yesterday that everybody is talking about, how much of a win this is potentially for the Republican Party. When you see the color on that map that I showed a moment ago, you're seeing county boundaries that aren't changing, which then begs the question, what's going on here? Why has purple America disappeared? Chances are you're living now in an area where your neighbors share your views. And perhaps it's what I said at the outset, that people among us who are mobile are now choosing a property, a home to live in part based on political dynamics. Hey, what's that community like? What's the school board going to be like? Who's the member of Congress? Who's in the state legislature? It's a possibility. I mean, maybe it's an osmosis. Maybe you're a red stater and you move into a blue area and you adopt the politics of that community. Or maybe just people are singling out an area where they know the politics and they want to live among the like-minded. Think the Villages in Florida. Do you remember the competing golf cart parades at the Villages for the presidential race? Traditionally known as a very red area of Florida. Maybe people, part of the allure of living in the Villages as a retiree is you want to be among conservatives. Maybe you want to live in Austin, Texas, because you're a Texan, but you're not a red state Texan. You like the funky, progressive nature of Austin. You're moving there for the politics. My point is this. Fixing the gerrymandering that flows from the census data is something that we ought to be able to handle with the professionalization of the drawing of those boundary lines. I'm much more concerned about the deeper seated issue of the lopsided counties that are evidenced in the last several presidential elections, where there's something else going on, where it's not just the politicians using a pen and saying, oh, let's isolate the Democrats over here, let's put the Republicans over there, but rather it's Americans who are determining what the political outlook of an area where they reside will be. So those are my two takeaways. One, the census data in the short term might not be the benefit or the boom for Republicans that they expect it to be. But two, we've got to pay as much attention to self-sorting as we are to gerrymandering. Thank you so much for watching and listening.